webinar. But today we're going to talk about, I've got a very a special guest here, Adam from OpenOrg, and who do a lot of work on transparency in organizations and why that's really, really important. And so we'll just start kicking off, but it'd be great if people in the chat could say where they're from today, and what they'd like to get out of the webinar today. So we've got an expert here on transparency, and obviously I'm Nick Marks from Friday Pulse, and I talk a lot about happiness at work and how to build great teams. So if you would like to put in the chat about what you would like to get out of the webinar, that would be fantastic. And I'll even try and show my Zoom skills and open up the chat from me, which of course I always forget how to do. But must be at the top here somewhere. Adam, very, very nice to. I can see Carlos is saying something because Carlos is from the Happy Startup School. So nice to
That
see
sounds
you.
like a nice place.
Yeah, yeah, they're great. They do a lot of work on the on how startups can be happy, and yeah. So Adam, sorry for my slightly frantic start.
All
I got
good.
frustrated for 5 minutes as I couldn't log into Zoom, and Adam was and Angela who's hosting it was going, "Oh, where are you, Nick?" But anyway, I'm here, and we're transparent, and we're open, and so Adam, please tell us something about yourself, about why you co-founded OpenOrg.
Yeah, it's journey of probably 12 years or so, and not necessarily something that was right in front of my eyes immediately, but high level. I've had 12 years or so in the people and talent space, mostly helping companies hire, and that's as a very hands-on consultant going into companies and helping them hire all over the world, but also building my own teams along the way. So 9 of those 12 years has been as a founder or co-founder of my own business as well. So over that time, I've worked with and hired for some very transparent, open companies. They've had the handbooks, they've had salary transparency, the works, and it's been a dream. Anyone who's been in a business like that will tell you how easy it is to hire, but not just how easy it is, how powerful that is when you see the retention and the culture and everything that happens after that. It's just very, very smooth. I've also been very lucky, I suppose, to hire for some companies that at the other end of the spectrum, very secretive, very vague. As a recruiter, as a person in charge of hiring, when you have no information to work with, hiring is not very fun. And you can do it, but you see the issues that appear after that. People don't stay for very long. They feel like they've been missold to. They feel like the experience they've got is not quite what they read on the shiny career site. So I've got a very, very clear picture of what works and what doesn't work in my view over time, and benefited from working with hundreds of different companies on that over years. And at the same time, building my own teams as a founder, have pulled that mentality into how I've tried to build my own teams and defaulted to my own version of open and transparent. I should point out, despite what I do now with OpenOrg, I'm not radically transparent, but I'm fairly open, and pulled open employee handbooks into the companies that I built, and felt like that's worked really well, and benefited us massively. So I've got that backdrop there. I left my last company at the end of 2022. I became a candidate again for the first time in 12 years. And despite knowing or hearing about candidate experience, we all know that it's not great and you hear it all day. But until you become a candidate yourself, you don't necessarily have that light bulb moment. And that was the light bulb moment for me. I was like, this really is bad. And what I'm sort of getting to there is like, every job advert looks the same, every career site looks the same. There's no information, very sort of fluffy and vague. And then you get to interviews, and interviewers aren't equipped and enabled or trained properly. They don't have the information themselves from the business to be able to run that interview properly. So you don't get the information you need as a candidate. So anyway, um, it was horrendous. Light bulb moment for me. I got chatting to an old friend of mine, John, who's my co-founder at OpenOrg. We've known each other for 12 years. We've talked about how we're going to fix the world of work one day. We don't know how yet, but we will one day. And finally, we've got the chance to come together and do that. And from then on, after a few conversations here, there, and lots of user research and chatting to people in the people world, OpenOrg was born.
Sounds, yeah, incredible. That candidate experience. I was just thinking as you were saying that, when was the last time I was a candidate? I mean, I I mean, I think I haven't done that formally since my very first job, you know. I've always sort of gone and started doing something and then it grow into something.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. I mean, it's like the old classic problem from economics of the sort of second-hand car salesman, that there's an information imbalance there, and employers in some ways have the upper hand over the employees, don't they? Because they can look at the employees' lives, but it's very hard for an employee, for a candidate, to know what it's going to be like in the organization they're joining.
Yeah, it's no, people say they care about it and get it and they understand it, and I was probably the same. I always said, "Oh yeah, I get it, the candidate experience," but until you're the candidate and you're in those shoes, all of a sudden you do care. You do realize how bad it is. So it's really interesting to be able to sort of step back and actually see things through a candidate's lens, through an applicant's lens, and really live and understand what the issues are. And then that's helped us craft what we've built with OpenOrg, and how we're now taking that into companies to try and help them level up transparency in their own ways.
Yeah. So I mean, one obvious thing if we just where we stay on this recruitment part for the moment, because obviously transparency is much more than recruitment, but hiring the right people is a very critical thing. And I often talk about in our work with Friday Pulse on happiness, that happiness at work, that happiness is a sign of good fit. It's actually a deep evolutionary signal that when we feel happy, we are in a good place literally in the environment, a good place internally. But and we use that language both ways, don't we? That I'm in a good, yeah. But actually, that's a sign of it. That when we're happy, we're in a good place, and when we're unhappy, we're in a bad place, and we move. So the aim of the recruitment process should be to find good fit, and from both sides. And of course, and that can take some time, that can take some whatever. But how do you see transparency? I mean, let's just start with something really basic like pay transparency. I mean, some very many jobs don't go out even with a pay range or anything like that. So and pay is a bit of a taboo. I've even seen, I think the BBC website are they doing a campaign on pay transparency? I've seen a couple of short videos recently.
There's some spatterings and PR
Yeah.
and murmurings of stuff going on, yeah, but
Yeah.
nothing sadly too intentional in the UK yet.
Right. I've definitely seen a couple of videos recently about people talking about how much they're paid and whatever like that. But we don't
Hmm.
talk about it very much. I mean, and so what how does pay transparency work in the candidate experience?
Not very well, on the whole. I say it's harsh to some of the companies that are doing a good job, and actually, there's some large organizations actually do quite well with pay transparency, and also the public sector as well. Like they have very, very rigid pay bands and grading, and people are very well aware of, like, what does the next level look like? The people above me, what are they being paid? You tend to have a good idea of that when you're in the public sector, despite it having its own problems, I'm sure. And large organizations, particularly like management consultancies, etc., tend to do very well on that as well. So large companies have their own cultural problems often, but pay transparency and those types of companies isn't actually too bad.
Mm.
Startup world, scale up world, which is where I tend to operate, isn't always as good. And there's a whole heap of reasons for that. But one of the big problems that a lot of people face on a general level at the moment is there's a lot of companies out there who have grown for a while, over a number of years, haven't had that level of transparency in place, and now have an incredible amount of inequity across the business around who's paid what and how and why. And you've got a team of people doing the same role but being paid differently based on who their mates are, or how hard they've pushed for a pay rise and things like that. So
Yeah.
lots of problems to unravel within those businesses. If they're sizable enough, companies don't necessarily know where to start. They're a bit anxious about making that happen. But there are problems caused by that if you don't action it. The, the Birmingham council problems that have been going on for years, and they've now declared themselves bankrupt because of equal pay claims and so on and so forth. So companies need to jump on it, but from a candidate experience perspective, it's not great. It puts candidates at a position of um, not being in power. And it's not to say that one side should be in power or not. There should be some sort of equal balance there. And I think that starts with companies actually talking about what their budget is and what they benchmarked the role to be, and that's a basic sort of requirement really for most people.
Yeah, when we were chatting before yesterday, when we were preparing for this, you told me a great story about a product developer, was it, or something?
Yeah,
And yeah, to tell that story about her, because it's just like really interesting.
some people have probably seen it as well. It was last year at some point. I can't remember exactly when, but I think it was in the US. There was a product designer or a UX designer or something like that, worked for a tech company. Paid transparency laws came into the US. I think it was New York. Um, so companies had to start advertising salaries. And she spotted that her employer was hiring for a UX designer at her level. And she saw the salary on the advert. And she said, she posted online, I think on Twitter, saying, oh, I saw that it was 20 to 30K more than I was being paid now. So I applied. Happy days. Great. So she's actually pulled her CV together, sent her application in, and applied to her own job effectively, in order to get a pay rise, which is like, yeah, tongue in cheek for sure, but highlights a really big issue there. If and it ties a little bit into the problem that is there, is that we all want pay transparency typically. Um, but we also need to appreciate that companies will take some time to get there. And there's a lot of internal work that you have to do as a business before you can just go out and put a salary band on an advert. It's not as easy as that. Um, so what we need to try and do, in my view, is support companies. Don't don't sort of name and shame, don't point fingers too much, unless there's some seriously bad practices there, but support them through that change, try and accelerate that change and get them to a point where they've made those internal changes so they can become more pay transparent.
Yeah. And presumably this rolls over into, I mean, we're starting with money and we'll go on to other things. We're not going to get fixated on money all the time because actually Carlos has put an interesting thing in the chat. He goes, you know, we have to talk about develop our relationship to money. That's yeah, that's I mean, I think in Britain we're very bad at talking about money, and I think in some other cultures they're more direct about it. But this must also apply to bonuses and benefits and stuff like that because you know often they're very murky what they are.
Yeah, I mean, bonus is shrouded in mystery. And I apply equity and shares to that as well. But lots of companies have some sort of bonus scheme in place, but it's not necessarily available to all employees. So there's a lot of rumor mill stuff going around. Who gets bonus, who doesn't, how much was paid out, how much wasn't. Um, it creates a lot of mistrust and unhappiness probably within the business, and also lack of clarity around eligibility for bonus. Lots of companies will pay bonus based on company performance, and that's okay. It's completely fair, but the lack of information and education around what that actually looks like, it causes an issue. If you can be clearer around, this is our approach to bonus, this is how and when it will be paid. If we hit these targets, these make it very clear to people what they'll be paid, when they'll be paid, if they'll be paid, and that it manages your expectations. But companies just do not tend to, from our experience, document this. From the data that we've started to see, albeit early days, we get a lot of companies doing diagnostics and tools, surveys with us, and people tend not to have documented bonus, policies in place.
Yeah, I'm a non-executive director for a small, 55 people, a vitamin company, Cytoplan. Excellent vitamins. If you want to have vitamins, couldn't recommend Cytoplan enough. They are really good. My late father was their director, and he's got some. Well, they're owned by a charity actually, but I represent him really. Anyway, we have a bonus scheme, and it is very transparent. Now I think about it in your terms. We distribute a certain percentage of the profits to a bonus scheme. There's a certain percentage which goes to the charity, and there's a certain percentage which goes for reinvestment in the business. And obviously there's some flexibility in that because like vitamins was an interesting business during COVID because it absolutely soared because people were looking for vitamin D and things like that. And then, of course, there's been a crash since as we've got a tightening, and that's not to do with the employees. So we obviously didn't go up quite as high as we could have done when there was the surplus, and quite as low as we could have done when there was the hit back. But we're very transparent about it, and it's a percentage of salary, and but we're not quite as transparent about what the directors get. I'm an unpaid non-executive director, I hasten to add. But it's an interesting dilemma about where you put it, where you put it. But the more transparent that you can be, well, there must be an optimal level. I always think whenever there's anything about happiness at work, whenever there's anything about quality, it's normally optimization rather than maximization. If you were transparent about everybody's salary,
Mm.
that might actually really be very uncomfortable. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's definitely not something I advocate for on a personal level. There's a couple of like famous examples out there. Buffer's the number one that everyone tends to have heard of, like on their website. If you go to Buffer's website, they've got a
Buffer. Yeah.
but yeah, but check out Buffer. They've got a or down on the footer of the website, they've got something, they've got like transparency tab. You can click into that, and they've got a salary dashboard which shows you the salary of every single employee in the business, including the CEO,
Yeah.
who, as you'd expect, is at the top because based on who's paid the most and all the way down. They've done that for years, and it's a really rare, very extreme example, I would say. And then he's blogged it over the years as well. So there was a lot of nervousness, anxiety at first from employees, but they embraced it. It's actually worked out absolutely fine. Their, application rates and appeal as an employer has gone through the roof over the years, and trust in their brand has gone up. Their retention rate or their attrition rate is half that of their industry peers. So yes, there's some anxiety around it, but they've proven individually themselves at least that it doesn't have to harm your company. However, I'm not advocating for that. It's too scary. It's too unnecessary as well. I think what most people want to get to create a more level playing ground here is the ability to apply to a job and understand what the salary is for that job. And then also understand that that salary has been benchmarked and worked out fairly based on fair market data rather than plucked from thin air. So it's not just about knowing that you're paid fairly, but also paid fairly versus your peers as well. So there's a few factors that go into the working out, but that's very doable for all companies to get to. You don't have to go any further than that necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I clicked on Zoom. Is Zoom still working around for everybody? My screen's suddenly gone very small. I'm having a real Zoom problem today. Zoom is not giving me transparency on how to push the buttons, but
We've still got participants here, so hopefully that,
yeah,
yeah.
good. Then my screen's now shrunk to a tiny, tiny bit. I'm sure I'll work it out in a minute, but it's just a bit disconcerting. Um, uh, so yeah, I mean, so let's take some other things. So we started with pay, which is perhaps the easiest to sort of start thinking about. But I know you've got something like 35 dimensions of transparency that you talk about. But give me the sort of top five things that people come to you with that they're thinking about how they can improve the transparency in.
Yeah, the top five are probably obvious ones, and then there's some really interesting ones that people don't think about, but are like mini light bulb moments for them when they start digging deeper. So just to frame it for everyone listening, we've got a 30 to 35 area framework that sort of anchors everything we do here and acts as our way of being able to make transparency tangible for companies. So people leaders can use this as a diagnostic to understand the state of transparency across their entire business, but also as a roadmap so they can fill in gaps and use that as a tool for them moving forward to fill in gaps and understand what they could do more with. So those 30 odd areas cover different pillars like culture, career development, compensation, so on and so forth. The top few definitely pay and salary and the areas that fall under compensation. Career development is another one that people need a lot of help on. It's one that's very sort of underdeveloped in a lot of companies and not in place. So companies struggle with how they can communicate that and show more transparency around that. Culture, I know it's broad, but if you look under our culture pillar, we've got 7 or 8 areas within that we dive a lot deeper into, and that's an area that companies struggle with. Lots of companies think, "Oh, we're very transparent about our culture," but the things that they talk about with culture is the sort of high level aesthetics, the artifacts, like some of the things they do for fun, and some of the things they do for like bonding as a team. That's where the ping pong tables and bean bags and stuff. That's how a lot of people describe their culture. What we're trying to get companies to do to become more transparent and help people understand, will I belong here? Will I thrive here? Will I be happy here? is give people a much clearer idea as to what your culture is like. And that for us is things like when and where you work, how you meet, how you make decisions as a business, how feedback works in your company. And those types of things on a day-to-day basis, when thrown together, dictate how we do our best work together as a team. How we and if I can read that detail and information and believe that I will thrive in that environment, then great. But I also want the opportunity to self-select out and say, you know what? I'm not a fan of zero meeting philosophies as much as some companies might love zero meetings. I really like meeting, and that's how I absorb my information. So I'm gonna opt out and go and work somewhere else. So I think it's really important that the role that we play is taking a very non-judgmental approach to however companies decide to operate is up to them. What we try and do is get them to be more honest and open about that, more matter of fact, so that people have the decision to make. But those are some of the key areas that people tend to need help on.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing it a lot with hybrid, aren't we? Like what can people do, what can't they do, and where the flexibility is. And people are asking for a lot more flexibility and quite rightly. And also it has to be in the organization, it has to work for the organization, it has to work for the short term and the long term. So these are difficult trade-offs, going on. And so and I think it's a total mess in all sorts of places. I was talking to someone in the public sector recently, where they've got people who still are, 5 days a week at home, and some of them even want to come in, but their boss is saying, no, we don't come in, we're virtual. And they have an office. So there's really very patchy across organizations how they can be doing this, these things which are very thing. So culture, I mean, obviously culture is what we do. So and particularly how you measure culture and how you improve it. And actually one of the things I think that I haven't thought about it in these terms actually, but Friday Pulse, we're quite radically transparent with how we communicate the results of surveys.
Mm.
We could be more. So I mean, where our trade-off is that we always when people do use Friday Pulse, they have a 15 question. We call it a culture profile questionnaire. It's based on what we call the 5 ways to happiness at work, which are connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. And you can see Maslow in that if you want to. You can see whatever. But we have 3 questions on each. And if a team does it, then we never show an individual score. I mean, I suppose that would be the most radically transparent, which is that, you can see everybody's score. We've lost one client on that who their head of HR didn't want anything anonymous. So we said, no, we don't do that. So that was a line for us. We wrap up scores in groups of more than 3 people, but we'll show the team, we'll show all of the team score, not just the team leader. But we won't show one team another team score. We'll show them a view up the organization so they can see their team, their division, the whole organization. So that's our way of dealing transparency. We do it that way, but we never show sideways views because our feeling is that can be undermining, So if you've got maybe a set of 5 team leaders who all manage similar teams, they don't want to know the scores in the parallel teams because that sort of can undermine a team leader, and what we want to do is work with a team leader. But I guess those are the sort of trade-offs we get to with openness and transparency, don't we?
Yeah, and it's subjective. Everyone's got a different view on it. Like the UHR director, he wanted, no anonymity at all. So each their own. And the issue you've got is there's never a perfect solution for everyone. Uh, I think if you completely remove anonymity, that of course that's the sort of dream. If you're coming at this from like a transparency angle, great. And when you talk about like psychological safety, there's a lot of arguments there to say, um, you know, anonymity kills psychological safety. However, you also have to appreciate that there's people in a business who could be incredibly introvert, shy, just do not want to be part of that. Now, you're not catering to them from a inclusion diversity perspective if you are, going too heavily down that path. Some might say that's okay as long as you're being honest and open about who you are as a business. Those people can self-select out, but then you end up with diversity and inclusion issues longer term because you're possibly building a business that only caters to certain people. So my point being, you can go very heavy down one path, but it possibly then there is a trade-off, and you possibly lose this ability to create that sort of one perfect organization from an inclusion perspective as well. And it's very, very hard to cater for everyone's needs. And it comes back very briefly to your point about flexible working as well. That's one of the problems lots of companies have right now is everyone wants more flexibility. Companies are feeling that pressure. And what I see is companies, CEOs, founders feeling like they need to provide more flexibility, but they're not actually able to offer it. So they'll try and suggest it, they'll try and pretend and offer it or, document it when they don't actually mean that they are wanting that from people. So there's a miscommunication there and a mismanagement of expectations. Employees are doing one thing, leaders actually trying to encourage a different type of behavior, and they're not being clear about what they actually need from employees. And
Yeah.
I personally think it's okay to work 5 days a week in an office. If that works for you and your business, then amazing. You will attract people who agree with that as well. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very, very interesting. There's a question in the Q&A actually, which is from Stephanie Littler. Often a company can say they're open and transparent, but their managers are not. How can you deal with this as an employee?
Yeah, and this we deal with this on a daily basis. This is happens a lot. So we look at career sites and all sorts, and we spend a lot of time researching companies. There's so many companies out there that lead with values of transparency and openness, and it's super interesting because you then can't read anything else on their job adverts or career site as a starting point. But one thing that we see go wrong very early on is companies leading with transparency and openness, but not actually defining what that means. And you ask 100 different people in the street what transparency means to them, you'll get lots of very different answers. So it's really important that companies, if they're going to lead with this, that they define we are transparent. And by the way, this is what it means to us. Because to some people, transparency might mean, okay, they're going to share all their finances with us on all hands every week. Others might mean, okay, they're going to talk a little bit more around my career progression. And so companies saying they're open and transparent, but their managers are not, you've probably got a very different view to transparency to the leadership. And in both of your eyes, you might have this perception gap. And we see that perception gap across all companies, all countries, all industries. What the company needs to do, whether they're listening or not, I suppose, is define what transparency means in your business. We talk about having a transparency philosophy. We've got a template on our website companies can use to guide them a little bit. Have that conversation, define it, lay it out for employees and potential employees as well, so that employees can then decide, does this align with my view of transparency or not? It's great that it's your view, but if it's not my view, then it's not transparent and I'm not going to join here. Others might say, yeah, great, that aligns. So if companies can do that, it might take some time, but some current employees might say, you know what, that this isn't for me. It's not the transparency I was sold, and I'm going to go elsewhere. And
Yeah.
future employees can decide up front whether that's what works for them. I don't know if that helps, Stephanie, but transparency philosophy is a great place to start.
You can put in the chat if you want to, Stephanie. And anyone else post any other questions there too. So I'm thinking, Adam, right? So let's go to the opposite. What's it like if an organization isn't transparent? Can they still exist? Can they survive?
Yeah, they can, and they will, and that's probably not helping my argument here. To help, nothing. Um, there will be examples. There's examples out there where companies have suffered and struggled and been through some serious like PR disasters, but they've survived. There's been like your Ubers of this world. They've had some pretty you know bad cases of lawsuits around pay transparency. It's cost them a lot of money, but they've survived. They come through it. So you can survive, but there'll be some serious issues along the way. I refer back to the Birmingham Council scenario as well. That lack of not directly transparency, but the lack of equity when it comes to fair pay over the years, which will definitely be linked to transparency, has effectively made them bankrupt. Through pay claims over a number of years. I can't remember, it's like £2 billion or something that they've paid out now to ex-employees. So yes, there's also an argument to say it will eventually catch up with you and harm you. You'll survive, but it will cost you a lot more money.
So I'm not very familiar with the Birmingham thing. Was that a gender-based pay? Was it was that the issue? Because obviously we still got this large, sticky gender disparity, which presumably
Predominantly like equal pay claims over a large number of years. It's only been in the news recently, but it's been going on for a long time, and that's
Yeah.
built up, and they've now finally effectively declared themselves
Yeah.
bankrupt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it will it will you will be able to survive, but it will cost you a lot of money along the way. Even if it's not fines and penalties and that sort of stuff, there's a cost to turnover and attrition and losing employees. And we touched on this yesterday a little bit.
Mm.
It's maybe a hidden cost lots of companies don't see or notice, but losing employees, regrettably, uh, is not healthy for a business or their finances. And you'll do a lot better if you can be more open, be more transparent. There's
Yeah.
heaps of research out there linking to that.
Yeah. I mean, in our work, we see that unhappy employees are 3 times as likely to leave the very next quarter. Unhappy employees' average tenure is about 3 years less than okay employees. Happy employees even more. And when you think about it in the recruitment process, there's so much upfront cost that it takes a long time to just get your money back when you employ somebody. And I think most organizations aren't, very good at tracking this, but it's probably a year for most, not always. I mean, hospitality is going to be much quicker, but in lots of roles, it takes a long time for people to get up to speed and actually add value to the organization. And then if they are leaving because of unfairness, I mean, I think a lot about lack of transparency is about how does it affect people's feeling of being treated unfairly? Because that's what's going to make them move. Do they feel respected? The gender, the ridiculous, stickiness of gender pay caps, is obviously going to make people feel it's unfair. And are you feeling recognized for your effort and that you're doing? And if people feel other people are getting more for doing less, that's not going to be good too. So these sort of emotional issues, the people's reaction to it, are really what motivates motivates their motivation. I was about to say that, I can't say that, but motivates their discretionary effort into work, and also whether they leave or not, and that costs an awful lot. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's time companies don't need to necessarily spend refilling roles when they're probably trying to hire for new people. Um, it all adds into your employer brand. People leaving, having had bad experiences as employees is just as bad as a candidate experience not being great. You're
yeah.
losing an advocate. If you're not treating someone well. So there's this compounding, almost a bit like compounding interest type,
Yep.
visualization there that's in the background that you can't necessarily see. And some bigger companies, I think, will possibly do better at tracking this. They have got the teams and the resources. Um, Startups and scale ups, they often don't even have a people team to start tracking these metrics. So
Yeah.
not to forgive them necessarily, but when you're going through the scrappy phases of like seed to Series B funding or whatever you're going through, and you're just focused on product market fit and growth, and I can see why some people are not focused on the cost of losing people, but actually let's just focus on finding more people so that we can get to where we need to get to.
Yeah.
But that's when Series B, Series C comes, and you start to really struggle with like toxicity and culture and things
Yeah.
going wrong. So it starts to show then.
I mean, it's just like with customers, you need to think about the lifetime value of an employee, and and if you've got leaky buckets, you're going to have an expensive process, going on. There's a question here in the chat, and please do put your questions in the chat as we go along. So, which areas of your offerings will be the most active and requested in 2024, given the needs of businesses this year?
It's interesting. I don't know if Luke means like focused areas on the framework that we've got, or offerings being what we do as a business. We're starting to see a real even balance across. We've got our accreditation that we do, which had lots of conversations last year, lots of interest, but we'd love to do this, but we've got to wait for budget next year and so on and so forth. So we're starting to see the fruits of the labor coming through now, and it's really exciting to see some companies coming back to us to say, hey, accreditation's on our roadmap. And the reason for doing that accreditation is usually a couple of trigger points. One is we've been through a heap of layoffs or change as a business. There's been a trigger moment. We need to start rebuilding trust. We need to do something to show our employees that we care about this and we want to be held accountable to driving that change. And that's exactly what we're doing with that. So that's really exciting to see companies embracing that and doing that. Been blown away also by the level of interest in the cohorts and the boot camps that we do. That's more for like individual people and talent folks to come together, meet, join our community, learn how they can start driving and accelerating change in their companies. even if their company isn't going to accept and drive that change, they still want to learn and know what they can do individually. So that's been amazing to see the positivity there. But also what's super interesting actually is talked a little bit about data and metrics just now. We've been absolutely blown away by how much interest there is in the people world for more data and better ability to tell stories with data. So we've launched in beta at the moment, peoplemetrics.fyi, got 300 odd companies being onboarded now for that beta, and we're building a waitlist post that. And I can't believe how many companies need help here, want help here, and want to be able to start linking data points together to track metrics and to build business cases for their leadership teams. So that's really exciting to see where that goes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, the one issue with data is sometimes people can get paralyzed by it, paralysis by analysis. I sometimes
Mm,
say too much data. And in statistics, we always talk about, can you see the signal for the noise? And, so what, so sometimes more data isn't the answer. It's actually having simpler data, I think sometimes that's why but that's just a personal thing. Stephanie's asking, is it best solution to leave a toxic work environment? In fact, I think that's as much a question for me as for you. And it's difficult, Stephanie, to know, but if things are outside of your control, ultimately, it's going to drag you down. So, you have to, in some ways, work out whether you've got the energy to change it. But if something is really toxic and then yeah, you do need to leave. I think it is where the answer is, because it's not going to be doing you good. It's not doing your health any good. Um, I was looking at this data this week about how the quality of a job is so impactful on your overall well-being and happiness in life. It's such a big impact. If it's a big impact from being unemployed to being unemployed, which is that if you're unemployed, obviously it's not good for your well-being. It's about 3 or 4 times the effect of purely income alone. But then the quality of the job itself, if you're in a really low quality job which has got, which is toxic, then that's going to undermine your happiness and well-being and your health. So in the end, you do have to take a pragmatic thing about it. But of course, money is important to people, but I think more often than not, that either trying to change it from within, or if you can't change it from within, moving on. Would you agree with that, Adam? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's the sad sort of conclusion that I come to in a lot of conversations I have with people that I work with on boot camps, cohorts, and just daily conversations that I have with people trying to get some advice on how they can do this. And when you listen to everything that they have tried over a period of time, the efforts they've made, and how broken sometimes they are, the best advice is just you got to get out. Your mental health is not in a good place. You're burnt out. Um, the issue is it's toxic for you, but it's not necessarily toxic for them. And if they don't see it as toxic, they're not going to change. And that's what in some respects, that's what's important here is it's not necessarily a bad environment for everyone. It's a bad environment for you, and it's not a good fit for you. And coming to that realization is the best thing to do sometimes is step away and try and find an environment that is going to be right for you. Someone else will go in there and absolutely love it and thrive and do really well. So not to sound defeatist, but I think if someone's in that position and they genuinely feel like they've tried everything and nothing's going to change because there's not that buy-in at the very, very, very top, um, that would be the decision I'd make.
Yeah, I was reading. Have you read the Ray Dalio book? And he's head of a hedge fund in the States, and he sort of takes radical candor to an even more extreme thing, with feedback, and they're dealing in markets and about trying to see the returns on it.
Hmm.
And it all makes sense, but I would find it absolutely intolerable as and yeah, being that direct and having no humor, no nothing, no empathy wrapped around it. I don't know. I couldn't cope. But you can see us. It works for some people. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ironically I am the least direct, candid person I know. I dance around stuff. I'm terrible at delivering feedback, despite trying to talk about being open and honest and transparent. I'll always be open and honest, but I take a long time to get there. And I would not thrive in an environment where there's like radical candor expected of you. I can't do it. I've tried. Um, and I could try and learn and get coached, but it's trying to be something that you're not to fit into an environment that you're going to be fighting against that tide. So my personal opinion is trying to, if I were to apply for roles now, really digging deep to understand how do you feedback here? How does it work? What does that look like? What's the approach in this team and the business?
Yeah.
And if it's not going to align with what I know I uh, enjoy and thrive on, that for me would be a big red flag. And I'd say that this is probably not going to be something that I'm going to enjoy long term.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding about how collaboration works. So, I mean, obviously, famously, and it is going very out of fashion, thank goodness, but there was the whole sort of rank and yank thing about performance reviews that, you'd rank people and then the top 10% were out of the organization. Enron did it, but lots of other organizations used to do it. And I think they fundamentally don't understand how humans work because, cooperation, collaboration is our superpower. That's what's made us a successful species. That's what makes us go to work together because that's why we're not individuals working on our own because collaboration, creativity, like when you have several people, you get that great thing when you're working on a problem together and someone says something like this and this, and suddenly you've got a solution that you wouldn't have thought of on your own, and you see this at work, you see it, we see actually justice delivered by collaboration, which is why we have jury services. Because if you just ask people to rank whether they thought the person was guilty or not, in their first instance, they change in dialogue, in discussion. Dialogue means finding meaning in it. And so pure rationality doesn't work, because the rational thing is always to be selfish and you never build, group outcomes, but group outcomes are massively important, um, so, it's always rational to I'm now thinking not a very good analogy, but it's what I was reading, which is about war, which is always rational not to fight, be the freeloader and run away. But of course, your whole village gets. I was reading something on evolutionary communities, but the whole village will get attacked, and okay, you
Mm.
might lose some people, but the village survives. If everybody went rationally, well, I'll just leave it for everybody else. You wouldn't get things done. So collaboration is really, really important, and it doesn't depend just on rationality. It depends on emotional ties, on connections with people. And if we're too brutal, then those go immediately. So it's a difficult balance to start striking. I've
It, it,
slightly gone off topic here, but
no, I mean it's valid from a trust transparency perspective. Like we talk a lot to companies about the idea of co-creation, which is
yeah,
like a lot around collaboration, of course, and it's vital to building trust. Like if people are involved in building something, they will use it and they will believe in it and they will trust it. If you just build it in silos, which people teams and other teams have been, you know, I can't think of the word. There's been issues. There's a lot of issues in companies where you go off and do stuff, work on things, and you don't communicate and talk and collaborate, and all
yeah,
falls apart. But if you can co-create, if you can pull people's voices in, that builds trust, that builds inclusion, feeling of belonging somewhere as well. So that collaboration piece is so important to companies thriving and people feeling like they are a part of something.
yeah,
But also building something that feels credible and trusted across your entire organization. So we talk about co-creation a lot and anything companies can do when they're working through whatever initiatives or projects that they're working on, get other people involved, because those additional brains, thoughts, experiences are huge as well. And that's one of my favorite parts of when we do like group L&D stuff on boot camps, cohorts, we do roundtables. And I've not done enough of these in my career or my lifetime, but I'd love to do more. That's where I do all my learning now. It's not like theoretical stuff or reading or absorbing stuff. It's listening to other people talk about what they've done in their business, what they failed at, what they succeeded at. And lots of examples that I use now when I'm talking to others and giving advice. It's not my own experience. It's someone else has told me something. And because it's such a good anecdote or story that you just pass it on. And that for me is where people learn is like getting together and
yeah,
sharing stories and collaborating.
yeah. Brilliant. So people, please do ask more questions now. We're running into the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and I'm sure both Orlando and I will be very happy to take your questions. But whilst we're thinking about that, Adam, I mean, so in the end, what would you summarize the value of being transparent and open in your organization is?
The CEO, leadership, board, there's intrinsic links there to productivity, profitability, if that's what you care about, and you probably do ultimately care about, what's going to save us money or make us money. It's one of those two things typically. There are heavy links to building more trusted, transparent organizations. For people teams, there's an engagement happiness link there for sure, and one that will have a much more positive effect on things like attrition and retention as well.
Mm.
So doing that will massively improve your ability to keep people in your business happy, and not just keep them happy, but keep them performing, keep them feeling that they're, they belong there and they're, performing at a good level, and aligned to goals and objectives and all that sort of good stuff that we haven't necessarily touched on as well. And for
Yeah,
talent teams too, it's going to massively lower the burden on your shoulders. The fewer people that you have to replace because they're leaving, you can focus purely on hiring for new roles. And the more open and transparent you are with the people that are potentially coming into your business, they're going to come in fully aligned to your culture. If you give them everything, fully aligned with knowing the good bits, the bad bits, the harsh realities, they're going to know exactly what to expect. There's no surprises. They're much more likely to stay. And it's not just about them staying longer. Their ramp up time will be much shorter. They've done half of their onboarding before day one. They
yeah,
know what the environment's like, the tools that you use, everything. That ramp up time is going to be drastically shortened. And we again touched on that yesterday with some visuals, but like that is the thing that also impacts productivity, profitability is the bottom line. So that's, I'm rambling a bit now, but like there's benefits to different teams within the business, but ultimately companies will perform better, and you can't, there's no argument against that when you look at some of the research.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's similar about, happiness at work, and which I think is ultimately, well, for me, that's the ultimate indicator. If people are happy, they're a good fit, and if they're not, obviously things are going to go up and down there too. I was just thinking that one thing I wanted to flag to people was that we have a free tool, Friday Pulse. It's got two forms. One is that individually you can go and check your own happiness at work. You might want to do that, was Stephanie, which was, you can check up your own happiness at work, and it gives you feedback on that. So that's at friday1.com. You can go to our website for the happiness test too, but it gives you something, an idea about what we do. We also have a free tool for individual teams, which you can do too. So so please do check those out. And presumably you've got some taster offerings, have you, Adam?
Yeah, we've got a heap of stuff that we throw out there. If you head to openorg.fyi/resources, we've got a heap of stuff that we've built, curated. There's some diagnostic stuff on there you can play around with to understand where your business is at the moment. We've got paid transparency diagnostic. So jump in, have a little look around. DM me if I can help on anything else other than that.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got a couple of things here. So
Mm.
you could look at you can see the chat too, can you, as well? So
Yeah.
Roy's question here, yeah. So is
So
transparency the right word here?
yeah, it's interesting. This is again, I wrote like the business that I run now is centered around this word transparency, but we try our very best not to use it too much because it does freak people out, particularly leadership. So reframing it in another way, some respects is sort of just dressing up as something else, but talking about like pay clarity rather than pay transparency immediately feels fairer, softer. Like people can understand a little bit about why it's important. Clarity is a really nice word that we try and use. Cultural clarity, again, you can see what that means and why it might be important to people. Transparency can feel a little bit exposing, like it means that sometimes you have to show everything and open it all up, and that's not necessarily what people are after. So I agree, whether it's integrity or clarity, there's possibly other words you could use if you're trying to build a case to your leadership team at the moment. Don't necessarily charge in with transparency. Try and use things like clarity and other stuff, and think about the language you're using.
Yeah. And there were some things which I think it's really important to be clear about. So actually, you were saying, we met yesterday, you just had a baby, or your wife presumably just had a baby, and partner, and parental leave is something really hard to ask, isn't it? So it's
Yeah,
just better if it's just there in the handbook and you know what it is, because otherwise it sounds like you're thinking about having a baby, which obviously going to put them off, or could do, although they're not supposed to. So there's things like that which I just think just being clear is really important, isn't it? So
yeah.
yeah. So then Dan is saying being able to ask for help from your teams helps morale. Being open that you don't have all the answers is powerful and transparent. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, that we don't. actually saying what we don't know. We could go into Donald Rumsfeld's state here, the known unknowns or whatever, but yeah, being open is important. I've always found that in my career, saying when I don't know something is actually quite powerful, rather than blagging.
Yeah, and again, this is Laurie, I've seen your question on both sides now, so I promise I'll come back to that in a minute. But the we have this conversation a lot. Lots of companies aren't intentionally hiding things, but they maybe don't have something in place, so they opt not to talk about it. And we'll take career development frameworks. So many companies don't have this worked out yet, and that's okay. But our advice to companies is just tell people that. We're a young business, we're still on a journey, we're still growing. This is under construction at the moment, and we're working on it, but we're not there yet, and we need you to know that. And a lot of employees and candidates will be absolutely fine with that. Not everyone needs to have a career path laid out for them straight away before they join a business, especially if they're joining a startup. They sort of know, but it builds trust and it builds some clarity for people so they understand what environment they're coming into rather than hiding it and letting people assume that maybe you've got something in place and then them finding out that it's not. So you can't do that with everything in your business, but picking out some of the really important things to candidates and telling them exactly what is there and isn't and what you're doing about it is one of the most powerful things you can do. So
Yeah,
agree.
absolutely. Do you want to go to Laurie's question and I'll come back to Amanda's in a second? Yeah.
Yeah, experience of transparency in general tends to be different across cultures and countries. Definitely. I haven't got stats, etc. to hand, but I can dig them out and share if anyone wants to DM me on LinkedIn. But check out Figures, who are an awesome business. They shared some details uh, a while ago around how different cultures and countries vary in levels of transparency. Um, so definitely it means different things in different countries. Things like pay transparency is taboo, more so in some countries than others, and cultures and others. So it will be different, and that can be trickier if you're coming from one country to work in another and used to something else. So again, I think the most important thing to try and maintain some I hate the word control, so sorry for this, but some control over that is the company who is hiring has to take on that responsibility of defining what it means to them as a business. Someone is joining that business, so it's up to the business to define and lead here and show this is what it means here, regardless of what country you're in, of what culture you're from. This is what it means to us. And if you're not okay with that, we sort of we can't cater to everyone. As much as people want to cater to everyone, and you can have diverse, inclusive businesses, without catering to everyone. I think it's important for companies to take the lead on what that means.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, Laurie, of a very different thing across cultures. It's not about pay, particularly it's about tax. I used to live partly in Norway, and every year they publish everybody's tax returns in the newspaper. How much they've earned. Now, can you imagine, as a Brit, that's just impossible to think about that they could possibly do that. But they were like, well, then you can, if your neighbor up the road's got two Ferraris outside and they say they've only got this amount of income, then it's basically showing that they're avoiding tax. And they took a very pragmatic view to it. But I mean, I just found it absolutely horrendous. But, it was extraordinary. And then, of course, Carlos said this earlier at the beginning, it introduces jealousy. If you start seeing other people earning more than you, how does that work? But that's what they do in Norway. They still do it. They basically publish, I think they don't do a newspaper, I think they publish it online, but they do that. So they're much more transparent about those things than we are, which is, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, awesome. But I wouldn't want to move to Norway. I'd be too anxious about getting tax returns in and all sorts of stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. It safeguards against so many issues. It causes issues if you're not open and transparent. And yeah, definitely seen that.
Well, Scandinavian countries are excellent in all sorts of things, like shorter working hours, like they're much more productive per their hours in Sweden and Norway, although they work shorter hours. So, we might return to the 4-day week as a webinar. I'm finding out lots of new data on 4 days a week and what's going on and interviewing some people. So we'll do that as another webinar later for Friday Pulse. Not necessarily that you have to move to 4-day week, but actually the example of that being an intentional intervention in an organization that is designed to be a win-win for both employees' well-being and the organization. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
I know it's not going to suit everybody, but there's interesting things going on there. So Amanda is saying, I do wonder about the future with so many people home-based and not mixing with their team. So, I mean, this is almost a happiness question. It's a really difficult thing that's going on. Is it going to be, is hybrid enough? There definitely are some organizations that are stuck at home, and I think they're not daring to deal with it. There's some that are trying to bring people back in, and they've got people that don't want to come in. From my early data on it, Amanda, and this is now a year old, so I probably need to go out there and find some more. It was very much that if it was an alignment between what the person wanted and what they had, that was where the happiness benefit was. But there were several people in my data sets who wanted to have more time in the office, and there were several people who wanted to have less time, and they were unhappy. So it was much more about an alignment. And I think that's the point really with this, is that the transparency is about being open, what you do as an organization, helping people decide whether they want the job with you or not, whether they need to look somewhere else. But what's getting missed, I think, of course, is the collaboration. And so many non-visual cues. So okay, we're zooming now, but you can't see my whole body posture, my hands, what they're doing. You can see some of it, you get a flavor of it, but there's so much more when you're in a room with somebody that allows you to do that. So there's definitely some losses as well as gains from working from home. The gains are normally at they are partly at the individual level, which is that less commuting, more freedom, and all sorts of things. And there are the organization as well, because there's an increase in productivity there. But again, it's optimization. I think it's always optimization and finding the right level. So look, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you everyone else for joining us. And I'm sorry for my Zoom problems at the beginning. And yeah, so give people your website again, where they can find you.
So it's openorg.fyi, all one word. And if you go on there, have a dig around, there's a resources page, which is hopefully very useful to lots of people. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn as well if you ever want to reach out, chat, DM, ask any questions. I tend to live on there.
Yeah, and I guess that's the same for you. I post 3 times a week or something on LinkedIn, and yeah, so and obviously I talked about Friday One as a free tool that you could use as well. So till next time, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good month. Thanks, Adam.
Bye bye.